Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Dauntless Leadership. I am so happy to have you here with me. For those of you who are enjoying the podcast, please don't forget to subscribe. If you're new to us, download, subscribe, comment. We'd love to hear your comments, and you can find us on the podcast platform of your choice, wherever you find your favorite podcasts, or watch us on YouTube or at dauntless.works. So today I have the privilege of welcoming Lisa Baird, the CEO of Next Up. And I'm going to let her tell us her career journey. But just as a little heads up, she and I worked together in my first job out of business school. And I admired her then. I admire her now. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So welcome, Lisa.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. And I'm really excited because, what kind of got me in the mood for this today is just seeing the podcast come up on my calendar. And sometimes you have a daunting day. In fact, lately, there's been a lot of daunting days. And so I have to say, the name of this podcast just had that little bit of inspiration for me. Because I think you do have to have a little bit of a dauntless or a lot of a dauntless attitude nowadays to really be the type of leader we want to be. So thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. And I'm glad you said that. I feel too that dauntless was the right word for these times.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite words. I have it on my wall. But I actually was listening to another leader, a recruiter for women on boards, say that courage is the word of the day for people in leadership positions because this is, and she said, a daunting time. So, we'll start with what does dauntless mean to you?
Well, it's just a lovely word.
Right about here in the podcast is where our listeners could be hearing your very own sponsorship message. Our subscribers are smart, talented, interested professionals. If you'd consider sponsoring Dauntless Leadership, we'd love to hear from you. I'm always available at lisa-kent.com. Thank you. I'm interested to hear about the move away from General Motors and technology and into sports, the NFL, women's soccer, and importantly, the Olympics.
I call my career path a cow path, believe it or not. And I think some of us actually do that type of kind of journey through our careers. Like maybe we don't all start off with, I want to be a CEO someday. And to me, early in my career, I was all about learning new things, putting myself in situations where I had to learn new skills or give myself new experiences. And a lot of those experiences and learnings were not always comfortable. They were sometimes downright frightening. Well, it became particularly important as I was going from kind of one industry to another. So early on, I spent my career in CPG companies, as you know, Procter and Gamble and Bristol Myers Squibb and uh, Clairol. I did a bunch of different healthcare and beauty care companies. Well, I went from being category manager of healthcare products to General Motors. And I will tell you, I speak about this now in a course I teach. I went from basically understanding, I'm going to say, a pretty simple business, right? It had products, it had marketing, it had sales, it had cost of goods, it had a little bit of an R&D investment, to managing an entire car platform at General Motors, the Pontiac Grand Am. And my first day, they gave me a P&L for this vehicle. And I went home and I went, okay, I am so in over my head. And I went, okay, I've got to understand capacity. I've got to and start understand a whole new approach to pricing, leasing, buying, incentives. I had to understand union costs. I had to understand fixed, variable. You had to understand the components. I went from a product that had maybe 23 ingredients and 2 components to an entire car in a manufacturing line that probably had over 5,000. And it was that moment when I realized I had almost no skill at being in this industry, and I had to be dauntless. I was always in the area of learning, and there were problems to be solved, but this required a up level of my skill, particularly understanding financials and understanding different business constructs and how revenue was made and the revenue model, and working with dealers, franchisees. So it was a completely different thing. And I remember going into meetings with people who were far senior from me with far different skills than I did. And I really had to say, you know what? I have something to contribute here. I'm going to listen, I'm going to learn, but I'm not going to let my voice be silent out of fear. I'm not going to sit in the back of the room and just take notes. I'm going to listen, I'm going to learn, to be open, I'm going to absorb everything I can. But I just remember that there it was, the most daunting P&L in the world. And I had to really just teach myself something new. From there, I was recruited to go to IBM. So I went from General Motors, one of the slower moving industries, because you have to build plants and capacity and source materials from China, to the fast moving technology industry, where everything changes on a dime. And I went in at a fairly senior position. And again, I had to completely learn a new industry. And this time, and it was really one of the most, I'd say, motivating times in my life, because I got the chance to work with some of the smartest people on the planet. Remember, it was IBM that helped put people on the moon. And just being surrounded by the talent and this impossible belief that anything is possible through technology, it was so energizing. But again, I had to go back and teach myself a completely different skill base, because I was dealing now with global culture. I was running marketing in 77 countries. I was dealing with all the component parts of IBM. It was a very different type of sale. Marketing was very different because it was B2B, but also the ability to set agendas for the industry, which at the time IBM was doing very, very well early on in the days of the internet. And again, it was that having to reframe who I was as a leader going to a different industry. Well, from General Motors, can you think of another industry that's as different as going from automotive to technology? Well, let's try sports. And I went to the National Football League as the SVP of Marketing and Consumer Products. And it was an amazing experience, because I all of a sudden got the opportunity to work in an industry where you were working with the most passionate fan base in the world. Like, there's something so incredible about, there's selling people things, and then there's working with fans. And for a marketer, it was right up my alley, because you can connect with them. But there's a pressure to that, because when working in sports, from a business perspective, you don't sit around and hang out with athletes. I mean, I did do my share of that, just to be honest. But you're really working in an industry that is driven by the schedule of competition, which is very, very different than a business schedule. Yes, you have to make quarterly earnings. You have to do all the constructs that accounting and SEC regulatory standards do in business. But there is nothing as unforgiving as knowing that when you get up on Monday morning, everything you do has to be ready for the Thursday night game. And that Thursday night game is not going away because the product didn't work, or because it is a contract between you and the fans. And I learned about agility in sports and nimbleness and the ability to have a long-term vision, but be able to pivot based on the media, the landscape of media, in ways that, again, to some would feel daunting. And to me, I just kept going, saying, you know what? I'm going to not take these skills from here and apply them. I did do that, but I'm going to take what I'm learning and I'm going to learn a new way of doing things that's going to make me a better leader. So every time I was able to be that learning leader, I became a better leader. And at this point in my life, I now had a platform to exercise my leadership in, because let's face it, the NFL, or when I went to the Olympics for 10 years, or when I became the commissioner of the National Women's Soccer League, you now have a platform to serve your fans, but also take a stand because your fans expect you to, right? And you use the platform for good. And I would say in sports, being able to use a platform to realize, to make the world better because of sport was just something that I will treasure in my career for a very long time. I was so privileged to be able to work with Paul Tagliabue and the owner of the Saints to keep the Saints in New Orleans after Katrina, and in the NFL, because it's much smaller than people think it is. You don't have that many staff. I remember speaking up in the meeting early on when we were setting the schedule for that year. And at the time, Commissioner Goodell said to me, or Tagliabue had stepped down, and Goodell said to me, you know, Lisa, what are we going to do with the Saints? It's going to be their first season back from Katrina. What are we going to do? And he goes, and someone threw out the idea, well, why don't we do the kickoff party? That's all right. That's a good idea. We'll do the party down on the levee. And I said, I stood up and I said to the people doing the schedule, I remember them, they do the schedule, which is a very difficult thing to do. And I said, no, we've got to have the first home game in the Superdome. We've got to bring the Saints home. I still get very choked up. And Commissioner Goodell, Commissioner Tagliabue, Howard Katz, all the people around the table, they looked at me, and I've never felt so supported and empowered before. Wow. Because they looked at me, they got the idea. I said, we've got to replace that picture that America has of the Superdome and the tragedy and the crisis with the picture of a revitalized city with the Saints coming home. And it took them, because they were the decision makers, it took them about 5 minutes to say, you know what, you're right. But boy, we had a schedule to get the Saints back in New Orleans, to rebuild the Superdome, get there down. And it's unforgiving, because that game was going to open on Monday Night Football, no matter what. And I learned in that moment not how smart I was, because I think, Lisa, you or any one of your listeners on this podcast would have said the same thing. Replace that image. Use the platform of the NFL to do something great for the city of New Orleans. But the people I learned more from at the NFL, commissioner, you know, the EVP of media, Howard Katz, who does the schedule, the owners, they were true leaders, not perfect leaders. And I'm going to get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Not perfect leaders, but they were good leaders, because they realized that great ideas can come from anywhere, even from the youngest, newest employee at the league, which was me. And they knew that they could pull it off, right? They were leaders because they went into that position. And I know that you used the word courage before. These are people that don't act out of power. They act out of courage, because they know in their heart what they're doing is not perfectly. I then went on and I had many more experiences like that in the Olympics. And I had 10 years in the Olympics. I was able to go all around the world and bring Team USA, our delegation with us, represent our country magnificently, not just on the podium, but as guests in the country. Working with my still friends in the Olympic movement, who really do try and make the place a better world through sports. Not that it was all perfect and easy. There were crises, I can't tell you.
Although this Olympics, I heard a lot about this, was the one thing that could bring the world together.
It is.
In a very divisive time, Olympics are a way to bring us together.
They bring us together.
Suspend reality.
It is. And it goes back to one of the original tenets of the modern Olympic movement was the founder said, We're going to go and we're going to say that every country has to dedicate 17 days of the Olympic Games to peace. You may not do it. And every year they still make that attempt. Talk about courage. They go to the United Nations, they sign a provision that every country will cease. And you have to love, if not what happens in practice, the fact that we still strive for that, to bring the world together through peace. But boy, did I have crisis learning on the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked in a volunteer-led movement that's very different. And again, it was being that leader. You know, you'd wake up in the middle of the night in a foreign country and there would be something that would happen and you'd have to deal with it. And, you know, it draws upon your resilience. Well, after 10 years, I had took a step back, but I got recruited to be the commissioner of the National Women's Soccer League. And that was my last job in sports. I'm really proud of what I did there. I learned a lot, not being a perfect leader. And you know, there were things that I would have done differently as a commissioner, which is a unique job. But I was really proud that I put into place incredible protections for players. I started the CBA. I did the first agreement for compensation during COVID. I was very proud that our league was the first league back to competition during COVID, and we were a women's sports league.
I did
Not
not
we were
know
the
that.
first women's, and I was really proud because our players were with us all along the way, and it was a true partnership between the owners, the playerships. But again, not perfect. I'm talking too much, not giving you time to ask questions.
No, the purpose of this podcast is so I can learn from you and my listeners can
Okay.
learn from you, and I'm grateful. But obviously, I have so many questions, and this is why I admire you. You had the courage to truly pivot from CPG and healthcare to auto, from auto to technology, from technology to sports. And I I like to tell people when I'm talking about leadership that if you're able to ask the right questions and if you trust your instinct and your gut that you will figure it out, you will figure it out. You will surround yourself with the right team to get done what needs to get done. And it sounds like at each phase, you were able to do that. But what made you make that first pivot away from healthcare and CPG to General Motors? I remember reading about it and thinking, at the time, that was very brave.
It was very courageous. um, you know what it was? It'll come down to a very simple story. When I was at Procter, where I started my career at, I really worked under what I regarded as one of the greatest CEOs of all time. His name was John Smale. And I was doing my career in healthcare. I'd left P&G and went there. Anyway, he became the chairman. He stepped up to become the chairman of General Motors when it was on the verge of bankruptcy. He was on the board and he stepped up to become the chairman. And he wanted to bring brand management into General Motors. And they selected 6 external people to be the pilot brand managers. They had 33, but people from the outside to bring some interesting new thinking. And I was reluctant to go to General Motors. I really didn't want to go. And he recruited me, and I finally was able to get on the phone with him. People were trying to sell me on the job. And I got on the phone. I said, John, you know, I had the privilege of working at P&G. You were the statesman of CEOs. You did it perfectly. And I'm going to come back to this word in a minute. I said, why would you, it's exactly the question you're asking, why would you give up everything you've done, put your reputation on the line, take on an organization that was on the verge of bankruptcy, and by the way, one that could affect the economy at this point. And you know what he said? It was so simple. He said someone had to do it.
Hmm. So how could you not go?
And I went. I said, I'll come.
Interesting.
Sometimes it's that, and in fact, it's the why I went to the Olympics. Someone I worked for, he was my client at the NFL. His name was Larry Probst. He was the chairman of Electronic Arts. Kind of like very smart, very intellectual, went CPG, ended up getting in video gaming, and he ended up becoming the chairman of the US Olympic Committee at a crisis time in the Olympics in the United States. Everything had gone wrong. We had just lost a huge amount of sponsors because of TARP in 2008. We had put into place an ill-fated bid for the 2016 games, which we lost in humiliating fashion after bringing our sitting president to Copenhagen. We were kicked out in the first round, humiliating. There were people calling for our heads. And I remember getting with him and saying, you know, Larry, he brought me in as his CMO. And I said, Larry, we got to take a step back and we got to bring some other people in to learn from and help guide us through this time of transition. And boy, you'd want to talk about a leader with grit. He was the chairman, successful, doing everything, took it upon himself and said, I'm going to help restore with then CEO Scott Blackman, who he hired later on. And we're going to restore the reputation of the USOC in the Olympic movement. And they did. And we eventually we won.
You were part of that.
I was part of it, but I was part of it. And I did my part. I helped bring financial stability to the Olympics. We had record sponsorships. We renegotiated revenue sharing committee. But more importantly, we became respected as Americans and not entitled. It was really, really amazing. So following leaders, but also being a leader that people will follow is kind of my mantra. I'll kind of leave, and I've got just a couple minutes. I'll leave it at one thought. I'm here as the CEO of an organization that I believe in tremendously called Next Step. We've been around for 24 years. We were started by some amazing women who said, we want to create cultures that advance women in business. We want to do so grounded in industry and networking professionalism. And they did it 24 years ago. We're one of the oldest women's empowerment organizations, but we're also the leading member association. Well, next year, we're going to celebrate our 25th year. Okay. And that's pretty much a big milestone for any organization, let alone a nonprofit in women's empowerment. And we owe it all to our founders and our members and our corporate partners who've been there from the beginning. I've learned that I am an imperfect leader. I'm not a perfect leader. And I put all of those visuals and ideals and cliches and stuff about how to be a perfect leader aside. And I said, I want to be the type of leader that asks questions, that can really understand what everybody in the room can bring to the table and really get them to be part of the solution, that can learn that one size does not fit all. Just because you're a leader at General Motors or a leader in the Olympics does not mean you're going to be the best leader of the Women's Empowerment Organization. So you're going to have to be agile and adapt your style. And I want to put to work all the lessons I've learned and just own the fact that sometimes it's really acknowledging and being authentic and vulnerable about your imperfections as a leader that actually will be the way that you can be dauntless with your team behind you, with your partners behind you, with your family behind you, because they're going to reach in and realize that you're type of the leader that is going to take them to the next level.
That's a phenomenal way to finish. I want to make sure, and I will highlight Next Up. We'll super it. We'll link to the website. What can Dauntless do for Next Up? I found you again because I was taking classes through the organization. Is there any message that you want me to get out about Next Up to the listeners?
Yes. Next Step is a membership where anybody can join. We're a nonprofit, so we keep our pricing so accessible because we want you all. We have world-class learning and development people. We have the top 500 Fortune 500 companies that support us. But what the most important thing I think for right now in these daunting times is people, and we have males and women that are members of ours. You need an external network that not only is going to help support you and you can network with for transactions. We do all that. But this is an organization where you belong. No matter who you are, you belong here, and we will find a way to make you belong and be successful within our association. So if you can just get the message out and tell people to go to our website, DM me on LinkedIn, reach out to any one of our 16,000 members. You might know them, or our 21 regions, or even our partner companies. They're all on our website because we'd love to welcome you as a member.
So just so much to talk to Lisa about in so little time. I want to say, Lisa, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, and have a dauntless day.
Thanks. Take care. As I close each episode, I'll remind you all, follow, subscribe, tell your friends about our podcast. Let me know what you think and what you want to hear about. Hopefully, you'll agree Lisa is impressive with her many iterations of leadership. Try Next Up. And in the immortal words of my mom, Arlene Barnett, you don't have to know what you want to be when you grow up, just what you want to do next. Thanks. See you next time.